Body organization. How is a body organized? Your learning targets are to know that cells are differentiated in multi-celled organisms and that each cell type has a different job to do. And that you can create an argument supported by evidence that the body is a system of interacting subsystems, hopefully you remember that word, composed of tissues, organs, and organ systems. Let's get started. Just to give you an overview of where we're going and where we've been, you guys have already learned about parts of a cell. You know what cells are, you know the different parts that are inside a cell that perform different jobs. And in our last unit, we were really talking about the functions going on inside cells: mitochondria, chloroplasts, respiration, photosynthesis. So now this is where we're going. How is the body then further organized? And you will be learning about tissues, organs, organ systems, and just a reminder about atoms and molecules, how they are what build cells. They are much smaller than cells. So we're going to start small with specialized cells. You guys know what a cell is. What is a specialized cell? It's just the idea that cells have different sizes and shapes based on their job. This also means they're differentiated. And you know what that word means if you just think different, right? They're different from each other. And if you look at the pictures down here, we've got muscle cells that are long and skinny. Bone and connective tissue have these little extensions on them. Liver cells and cartilage cells are just kind of standard cells, but do have a particular shape for their function. Red blood cells are another really popular example. Red blood cells actually look like little bowls. They have this kind of depression in the middle, and if you know what their job is, which was something we'll continue to talk about, their job is to carry oxygen. And the oxygen molecules actually bind right there where that depression is, where this lower area is. It's sort of an adaptation to help them carry more oxygen. They actually lose their nucleus so that they can have this kind of sunken area, which lets them hold even more oxygen. And that's why red blood cells have to get replaced every 3 months. They don't have a nucleus. They can't fix themselves if something's wrong. Some other examples here. Some cells can be really tiny, small, and some can be very large. Just as a contrast, there's an example. Red blood cells we just talked about, they are really tiny compared to some of your other cells. But neurons, which are nerve cells, are huge or can be huge. Sometimes this piece here is called the axon. The axons can be up to 1 meter long. It's unusual, but it can happen. And so that is huge for a cell. In plants also have specialized cells. For instance, root hair cells. They are called root hairs because they have these little hairs coming off of them. And it's another example of how their shape is helping them perform their job. Because a root's job is to collect water, and having this long extension helps them collect even more water. It gives them more surface area. And of course, plants have other shapes as well. Pollen has this kind of funky looking capsule. And then these vascular cells, xylem and phloem, are tubular because they're conducting transport of water through, or sugar through the plant. So again, just another picture to remind you, atoms and molecules are not alive. They are super tiny. They are what are building cells. And then cells, of course, form tissues, organs, organ systems, which we're going to get to. So the next level of organization is a tissue. So tissues are just a whole bunch of cells that have the same size and shape that are working together to do the same job. So if we look at the muscle cell tissue here, right, muscle cells are long and skinny, and you have a whole bundle of them here creating a muscle tissue. And muscle tissue is all working for movement. Muscle cells move by basically lengthening and shortening. So you could think of tissues as being like cells that are on a team, right? They all look alike, just like a team does. They all, wear the same jersey. They may not be quite exactly the same size and shape, but they're all performing the same job, right? Which in the case of basketball, you're trying to win the game. In cells, you're just trying to do one particular function to stay alive. Here's some other examples. Here we're looking at a frog. We're looking at all the different tissues that are inside the frog. We've got nervous tissue in the brain, bone tissue, epithelial, which we'll talk about in a second, dermal, reproductive. Here we've got a bunch of muscle tissue, epithelial in the stomach, and blood is considered a tissue. So let's talk more about the tissues in animals. We're on the left-hand side of your table there. There's 4 tissue types in animals. The first one on the list is epithelial. Epithelial is what's covering the outside of the body and lining the inner surfaces of the body, and it's also what forms glands. So an example might be your skin. So you can see in the chimpanzee here all the places that you would have epithelial tissue. It's lining the inside surface of your respiratory system. It lines your gut. And then, of course, on the outside of your body as well. And in this case, it's covered in hair. Second type would be connective. So if you just think about what connect means, right? You can understand why it's named this. It's filling in spaces and connecting other tissues together. Supports, protects, nourishes, and insulates organs. So think about ligaments, cartilage, blood, even bone is considered a connective tissue. Here we're looking at a knee joint in the chimpanzee, and it's got all the different connective tissues there. Fat, adipose is fat, blood, cartilage, and bone. Then we have muscular tissue. Muscular is the third type of tissue in animals. It contracts and relaxes to allow movement, and some organs are made out of it. For instance, your heart and your stomach is made of muscle tissue. But then, of course, you actually have your muscles, like your biceps and triceps, your quadriceps. All of your muscles are built of this kind of tissue. And technically, there's 3 types. Skeletal muscle, which is attached to your skeleton or bones. Cardiac, the only place you'll find that is in your heart. And then smooth muscle can be in multiple places, like different organs. For instance, your stomach is smooth muscle. Then we have nervous tissue. Nervous tissue's job is to transmit messages through the body. And as we talked about with the neuron cell, they do have these funny specialized cells, right, which allow them to do their job better. These little connections here called dendrites basically receive the incoming message from surrounding neurons, and then it is passed along this long extension called an axon. And here's what they look like on the microscope. So you would find these all over your brain, your spinal cord, and nerves all over your body, in each of your sense organs, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, and all over your skin. So here you can see in just one person's arm all the different examples of tissue. Epithelial, which is your skin, muscle tissue, nervous tissue, and then all the different connective tissues, blood, cartilage, bone, loose connective tissue. Now plants have tissues too, and I think it's important to compare. You guys have just learned a little bit about plants, but plants have dermal tissue, which is similar to epithelial tissue in animals. It's for protection, and it helps prevent water loss. You guys actually already looked at tissue like this. When we looked at the epidermis, both of lettuce and of onion, you were looking at dermal tissue. Vascular tissue in a plant is for transportation. It's transporting water and food. And you got a little taste of information there. We learned about xylem and phloem. Xylem starts with an X. Phloem makes the F sound but starts with a PH. And these are what form the veins and leaves. And you also got to see that on the microscope a little bit. So you'll find vascular tissue in the leaves, but also in the stem and in roots, because the entire part of a plant needs water, and it needs oxygen, and it needs food or carbon dioxide to be distributed to the plant. So the vascular tissue helps with that. Ground tissue does everything else. This is the only other type of tissue in a plant. So it's where photosynthesis is happening, food storage, growth, support. Here we're looking at the cross-section of a stem. So we've got dermal tissue around the outside, vascular tissue in the middle where basically the veins are. And then all this stuff in between is just considered ground tissue, where it's doing those other jobs. That brings us to organs. The definition of an organ would be structures that are composed of 2 or more different types of tissues. And they generally have specific functions and recognizable shapes. You guys are probably familiar with some of your animal organs, things that are inside of you, like your stomach, your liver, your heart, your lungs, your brain. Those are all organs, right? They're tissues that are working together to perform one job or one function. You will learn more about these as we get into each system that we study. Plants have organs too, and plant organs, roots would be considered an organ. Generally their job is to suck up water, but also to anchor the plant in the soil, and some roots store food, like a carrot. Stems, right, hold up the plant, sometimes hold up flowers and leaves to get light or to help the plant reproduce. A flower's job is to reproduce, and we will talk about these more when we get into reproduction. And leaves, you guys know, are the primary photosynthesizing organs of the plant. This brings us to organ systems. So an organ system would be a whole bunch of organs that are working together to perform one job or function. And we will talk about these individually. You guys will be doing a foldable just to get an overview about these. There's really only 3 that we're going to look at in detail, however. And those 3 would be your digestive system, your circulatory system, and your respiratory system.